This morning, we're going to be discussing the issues surrounding military reintegration. We have an impressive panel of experts, both in terms of experience and also in opinion. So let's go ahead and get started. General Parker, the first question is to you. As former commander of British Land Forces and past deputy commander of coalition forces in Iraq alongside General Petraeus, can you tell us a bit about the veteran reintegration efforts you see in the UK? It might help all of us in the room to have a contrasting example of our chiefly American experience. And in particular, I'm thinking about the Poppy Appeal movement.
Certainly. The first thing you have to understand is scale. Britain is a small country. We have about 18,000 people who leave the military every year. And over half of those are people who've failed to complete their contract. So either they've been insufficiently capable in training or they haven't done their minimum contract level. They represent a challenge for any government, but they're not the people that I'm concentrating on now. The 7,500 people who leave are real potential. They offer real potential for future employers. They are, as I'm sure most of you will know, and exactly the same in any country with a volunteer military. They represent real quality and real potential. And they are trained through transition largely for functional tasks. So they're given an opportunity to go on courses, but these courses are not necessarily tailored to the requirements of the employer. And the British system has concentrated on functional training rather than social training to change people's attitudes from living with inside very tight institutional frameworks that are fantastic for a fighting force, but are very different when you leave at the end of your service. So more emphasis on preparing people for life in the civilian environment is something that the British need to do. They have a catcher's mitt out there, which is organisations like the British Legion, formed after the First World War in 1921-22, that provides a charitable framework and raises its money through an annual appeal on our Remembrance Day, the 11th of November. So they are a sympathetic and essentially a patronising organisation. They are not there to exploit the potential of this fantastic commodity that leaves our armed forces every year.
Thank you. Minister Gutenberg, you're the former German Minister of Defense and Minister of Economics and Technology. As the defense minister, you led the most significant structural reform of the German armed forces since 1955. In particular, you spearheaded the effort of transforming the German armed forces from a conscription-based army to an all-professional military. In the United States, we have a military-to-civilian divide that causes Americans to feel indifferent about veterans' issues. For example, less than 0.5% of Americans have served in the military. I'd like to ask a provoking question about the all-volunteer force in your country. Do you feel that civilians share in the sacrifice of sending men and women to war?
Not sufficiently, but they haven't done so before as well. So it is not tightly connected to the question whether we have a subscription-based armed forces or not. And we have struggled probably more than many other countries after the disaster of the Second World War with the fact of how to integrate armed forces into our society again, because there was a huge reluctance in Germany, and there still is, to accept the fact to be engaged again in out-of-area missions. So we do have a somehow similar situation as the one we have just heard from General Parker, but with the big difference that we have now a first generation of so-called veterans in Germany after our post 9/11 engagement, where we have been, and that's easily forgotten, the third biggest troop supply in Afghanistan after the US, after the UK. Many soldiers coming home with all those things involved about being a veteran. But it still took us another 5 years, 6 years after 9/11 to form a discussion whether we can even call them veterans. So there were formers, there were maybe reservists, but the term veterans did not fall on fruitful grounds at the very beginning because everyone said, well, let's not militarize the debate in Germany too much. So the attention has grown, but it's still not comparable to what you find over here in the US. And also this kind of gratitude you find more and more in the United States towards those who have served is something you would not find in a broad spectrum in Germany in that very respect. So if my experience now living here for the last 4 years is if you come to a train station or to an airport and you see someone with a uniform, people would approach them and say, thank you for your service. In Germany, most people would turn their backs. And that has to change, and also from an international, multinational perspective. And this is why we are so grateful that there are initiatives that try to form global approaches to bring those experiences together and this wonderful force of experience, as General Parker has just mentioned it, as something which is a huge asset instead of just a victim of having been in the armed forces.
Okay. William, you're the CEO and founder of Team Rubicon Global. Can you tell us what that is?
Sure. So Team Rubicon is an organization that I co-founded with my business partner, Jake Wood. Team Rubicon Global is now the global coalition that holds this entire Team Rubicon network together. Well, what is the Team Rubicon network? So Team Rubicon is an organization that was founded after the January 2010 earthquake in Haiti. My partner and I led a medical team down into Port-au-Prince a couple days after the earthquake. We're both former Marines, and at the time we were, kind of wondering what our next chapter in life was going to be. So we led this medical team down into Port-au-Prince after the earthquake, and we ended up being one of the very first teams on the ground. And so since then, since that very first mission, where we deployed 60 individuals over the course of 18 days and did everything from, we paired military veterans and medical professionals and did everything from surgical debridement to delivering babies to full amputations. Since that time, we've conducted 84 missions now around the world. We have a mission ongoing right now in Nepal and Kathmandu. We have a team on the ground. And so Team Rubicon Global takes military veterans from around the world and repurposes their skills for disaster response. And so today we have the American team is over in Nepal, and we have a British team that is en route to Nepal as well.
Secretary Sullivan, you're the Assistant Secretary of Veterans Affairs, and you have a wealth of knowledge and experience regarding the reintegration of veterans. What lessons has the VA learned since 9/11? What is it doing well, and where can it improve?
That's a great question. First I'd tell you that we were a little bit slow to kind of adapt to when veterans were coming back after the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But then in 2009, the President started what we call the President's Council on Veterans Employment, and said that the federal government, as the largest employer in the United States, needs to be the leader of employing veterans and has to lead by example, and the rest of the country can follow. 33% of all of the federal hires in FY 2014 were veterans. Recently, the VA, in partnership with the Department of Defense and joining forces in the Department of Labor, started the Veterans Employment Center. I just tweeted about it this morning. You can read about it and learn how veterans can access employers and employers can access veterans. So specifically, employers can go and find a dedicated group of resumes. And what's really, really neat for veterans, and I actually plugged my own information in there from the Marine Corps to try out the tool, is you can plug in your branch of service, your rank, and your MOS, and suggested jobs come up for you. So one of mine, I was a logistics officer in the Marine Corps, I plugged that in, and it came up that I might be an operations manager at a Fortune 500 company, which is actually fairly similar to what I did when I was in industry. So that we've come a long, long way in terms of providing tools for veterans and connecting them better with corporate America. Where I think we still need to go is that we need to have more leaders in corporate America. A number of companies are doing this very, very well, Starbucks, JP Morgan, PepsiCo being some of them, but we need more to follow suit, commit to hiring a certain number of veterans. And then once veterans get into the organization, it's very, very critical as to what we do with them there. It's not just enough to get them in the door to recruit, but then how do you retain top talent and promote top talent? So what we've seen be very, very successful is when companies put together, we sometimes call them like employee resource groups or ERGs, where there's a veterans consortium within a Fortune 500 company, and it's got executive C-suite level support. They form a network within the organization and have monthly lunch and learns or breakfasts where there's a cohesive network of veterans that can help each other transition, speak one another's language, and then also provide a community within the organization and also a network that will ultimately lead to additional retention and promotion. Joining Forces, the First Ladies Initiative, has signed up more than 1,600 companies to volunteer and commit to hiring a certain number of veterans. So we've come a long way, but we still have a lot of work to do.
So I have a little bit of experience with MOS conversions, and my question is, what kind of jobs will an MOS conversion tool recommend for somebody with an 11 Bravo background, or a Navy SEAL, or a special operator?
So those I would, without having checked that myself in the tool, I would imagine it might say that it would be similar to infantry, and you would have leadership experience, and thus you would be in a management role potentially at a plant. We've seen that. So one of the things that we tell Fortune 500 companies is, remember that veterans have things that not to say you can't teach, but that it's very, very difficult to teach. So Goldman Sachs can, in 12 weeks, take someone and make them pretty darn good at Excel. My friends from business school who are at McKinsey became pretty proficient in PowerPoint, right? It's harder to teach things that veterans have, like integrity, trust, honor, dependability, the ability to make decisions in the absence of complete information. And that translates to leadership skills that can be rapidly deployed in many types of organizations to lead various size teams.
Okay. And is the VA providing any lessons learned to our coalition partners?
So we work closely with a number of nonprofits and corporate partners. Recently, the secretary came in a little under a year ago and started what we call our My VA initiative, and that is to transform the department into one that is centered around veterans. We have 2 guiding principles, and our deputy secretary says them every morning at 9 a.m. 1, we put the veteran at the center of everything that we do, and 2, we are good stewards of taxpayer resources. Going back to guiding principle 1, putting the veteran at the center of everything we do, we recognize that the VA cannot alone solve all of the issues for America's veterans. Just similar to how nobody would expect the Department of Education to solve all of the issues in education, from preschool to college, for all of America's children. So we have to partner very, very closely with great organizations like Team Rubicon, like Team Red, White, and Blue, like The Mission Continues, because they can do things for veterans that we feel need to be done that we simply, because we're a government organization, cannot do. One of the 5 pillars of the My VA initiative, you asked about corporate partnerships, is strategic partnerships. So we've brought on a team largely from the private sector, which is similar to my boss, Bob McDonald's background. He was the CEO of Procter & Gamble. And we have a team leading strategic partnerships that will take a look at who we need to be partnering with, and then making sure we are leveraging the vast amount of people in America that actually want to help us.
Okay. Minister Gutenberg?
I have just one point I would like to follow up with, because you have asked about how do you cooperate with your partners, and I would also add to that your allies, and that's something I think where there's room for improvement. Of course, we're on a different level when it comes to our veteran affairs in our respective countries. But having said that, I know of many, for instance, German big companies who are in desperate need of finding employees who have that kind of leadership skills with an American background, for instance, with international experience, with loyalty, name it, all those points you have already mentioned. And the other way around, it's the same. Whenever I'm over here, people are asking me, we do have issues in Europe, in Germany. We need people who have excellent English skills. Most of our deployed soldiers have that. So it may sound like a banal, tiny little point, but I think we can do more to find coherence with our international efforts we have in this regard before we come to ideas like Team Rubicon. I think that those things can be put in place as well and be helpful for initiatives like Team Rubicon. If we would work together on a governmental level here a bit more closely as well, because I do know there's sometimes reluctance also from the German side. So we have quite some experience when it comes to reluctance. But in that field, I think we could do better.
I agree.
General Parker, tell me how, in your experience, the reintegration of American veterans differ than veterans in the UK.
I'm just going to answer. I will. I just want to follow up what the minister's just said. I think we need to bash governments' heads together a bit. And I'm not talking about the US. There is a completely different approach in the UK because of the thing called the National Health Service, which provides national health to every citizen at the point of need. So there is no driving force for a Department of Veterans Affairs. And therefore, finding the right plugs and sockets for people to speak on a really comprehensive and meaningful way is quite difficult. And I'm sure there would be resistance, speaking not on behalf of the British government, but as an observer. There would be resistance if the Department for Veterans Affairs approached the organisation in London, the government in London. There would be this sense, well, this doesn't mean anything to us, which of course is quite clearly not the point. And I would just like to also re-emphasise, focus on this creature who is the post-9/11 veteran. He and she is a completely different sort of person to the person that the British Legion was designed to support when it was created. It's the sort of person who has massive potential, as I've already said, and needs different types of care. And we need to change our gain control so that we deal with them differently in order to really exploit their potential. Answering the question about the difference, far be it from me to say anything about the US system. I know a little bit about it, but the key difference is that if you deliver free healthcare to your veteran, it provides you with the most fantastic framework to produce a network that engages with those veterans. In the UK, we do not have that, and therefore our veterans are generally supported either by patronising benevolent charities, which are fantastic, but they're looking to support those who are in need, not to exploit potential, or they are supported by the normal organs of state. And if there was a UK minister not from the Ministry of Defence here, they would say the veteran is no different from the ordinary citizen because he or she will get exactly the same level of support as the ordinary citizen. Worryingly for me, if there was a minister from the Ministry of Defence, they would start to talk about how they do everything well and they have the responsibility. And I don't believe it is right for a country to put its responsibility for its veterans to that department that is responsible for defence. That's where its priority needs to be, not caring for those people who have served and now moved on.
Minister Gutenberg, in the United States, the media has a tendency to highlight mental health problems, unemployment, and other concerns as side effects of military service. In Germany, how does the media's portrayal of military veterans differ?
Not that much. It's if you have, they would highlight the suicidal rate. They would highlight family tragedies that are connected to that. They would always seek the negative point of it. And if there is a positive connotation, it is mainly one that is somehow conducted to the topic, and this is where I think we have to improve as well as we are engaged with this, which somehow highlights what can we do to help our veterans. Instead of asking the questions the other way around, what can a veteran do to help the society, to help you? It's so much more positive. And it would give an entirely different fundament to the general idea of it. And this is something I sense over here as well. It's very often help our veterans. Yes, of course we need to do that. But the self-understanding of most veterans I know is, I would like to be taken seriously, and I would like to help my surroundings or on a global scale. And this is something where I guess if we find solutions that give our veterans and we put the bar pretty high here, a global impact, and not only digging snow in the winter if there is too much, or another perception in Germany, that's the main perception of veterans, is that you have a group of people somehow organized in a club atmosphere, sitting around a campfire, drinking obscene amounts of beer. It's
Not to say that doesn't happen.
Which comes, it doesn't happen, which comes close to a certain stigma a German has anyway. But those are the things where we could, I think, where we have to bridge that stigmatizing attitude. And I think the media is in general interested in stories like Team Rubicon is bringing it up right now. So that would be my answer.
General Parker, the same question. What commands the media's attention in the UK regarding veterans?
It's very similar. I mean, there's this whiff of sympathy rather than respect, which is how I would, and I don't mean it's respect for the potential, not just respect for the service. I think one has to take it to another level. I mean, I had been invited to be a director on Team Rubicon Global's board. I'm enormously honoured to do that. On Sunday, I was sitting, we haven't formed a UK team yet. On Sunday, I was sitting minding my own business at home, watching the news of Nepal come up, and I decided we simply couldn't sit by and not do anything, although we're not ready to create a UK team. And I have been completely overwhelmed by the level of support that has poured out of the UK veteran community, both British and Gurkhas, because they want to make a difference. And my goodness, they're amazingly capable people who will make things happen with no money, with no structure. It reaffirms to me what a fantastic commodity the veteran is.
You touched on something before, if I might, about the patronizing nature of some people towards attitudes, and also the media can be that way. I think that what sets Team Rubicon apart from a lot of those other organizations, those veteran service organizations that play into that, the patronization of veterans, is we don't lobby the Hill, we don't do advocacy. We recruit, train, equip, and deploy military veterans into natural disasters. And it's that service of helping someone else that actually is really helping themselves. And I think that's the key difference between our model and the model of other veteran service organizations. Is ours is one of continued service. We don't give you tickets to the ball game. We don't give you business suits. We challenge you to continue your service in a new mission of disaster response. And it's really a growing field too. Over the last 30 years, natural disasters have doubled in size and frequency. And that's not a political argument, that's just a fact.
Can you tell me what veterans can do, in your opinion, to help destigmatize themselves?
Well, I think that veterans, there was a study that came out in 2009. It was commissioned by the Joint Chiefs of Staff by this organization called Civic Enterprises. And it asked veterans, what do you want to do when you leave the service? And 92% of them said, we want to continue to serve. And the top two responses were, one, helping their fellow veterans, and two, disaster response. I think, and it's our model, that continued service, and by continuing to serve, helps destigmatize the perceptions that people have of veterans, because it shows them as assets, not as liabilities. They are resources, they aren't liabilities.
I mean, just from a UK perspective, there is a long-grown culture of when somebody leaves the service, they have done their service and they go into a job that will fill the gap between then and the day that they die or retire. And they don't aspire, our veterans don't aspire to do the brilliant things that they could do. And we in the UK need to make them aspire to do more. And you do that by bringing more public sector influence into personal development training throughout your career, so that when you get to the end of your career, you're ready to go out and do things because you understand what you're capable of.
Minister Gutenberg?
Let me pick up the idea of Team Rubicon Global here. And that was one of the reasons why I didn't hesitate when William, with his enormously driving force of convincing someone to be part of an idea, and General Petraeus reached out to say, is that something where we could align and an idea that goes further than just taking care of veterans? And one thing that struck me at that point was if we talk about disaster relief, we also talk about not only the face of a nation that's been hit by a disaster, but also about the faces of nations that get involved when it comes to disaster relief. The face of businesses that get involved when it comes to disaster relief. And then you need to find the most experienced, the most skilled people who would align in such a situation. And the idea of having at a certain point not only the fabulous 20 to 30,000 already engaged American veterans there, but also shoulder to shoulder German veterans, British veterans, Norwegian, Australian, and maybe in 4 or 5 or 6 years, even Russian veterans. This is a bridge building component which is invaluable and unique. That's something you cannot produce in the back rooms of G7 meetings, or hopefully at sometimes G8 meetings again. Well, it will take a while up until we're there again. But it has a component which is, in my opinion, something which can change a lot of perception towards, say it very openly, towards a US foreign policy that's not perceived at every single corner around the world as being the best one imaginable. Same is true for the behavior of certain big industrial players. And if that's connected in some way, and the same is true for German big industrial players and our foreign policy, which sometimes isn't even existing. But this is something extremely flexible, extremely professional, and where we could tie also interests together that go further than just a cold business or cold national interest into something that's actually heartwarming.
Maura, what can the VA do to solve the perception gap?
Are you talking about the perception gap on veterans as being victims
Victims
or?
of their service.
Yeah, I would wholeheartedly agree with the comments so far, and it's very, very interesting, although candidly a little bit disheartening that that's the same in Germany and in the UK. That what we've seen is that veterans are often viewed as victims or as heroes, when in reality there's a lot of gray sort of in between. Recently in Washington, the First Lady, in conjunction with an organization called Got Your Six, which is to empower veterans to be civic leaders, called on Hollywood, and Bradley Cooper, who starred in American Sniper, was sitting right beside her when she did, but called on Hollywood to accurately portray and represent veterans, and also to hire veterans. So I think the media has a huge, huge role in this. 1 out of every 12 Americans is a veteran. What we would like is for, in a feature film, if there were a group of folks around, Will's and my age, that are sitting at a coffee bean tea leaf in San Francisco, and they're talking about what they did in 2005. One might say, he was a teacher. One might say, she was a doctor at Massachusetts General Hospital. Another might say they were in Afghanistan, and someone else would say they were at McKinsey, and that would be very normal. And then it would just move on with the film and not have it be a gasping event, because 1 in 12 Americans are veterans. I think also the media has a responsibility to show the very large number of veterans in society who are doing great things. 18% of Congress are veterans right now. Now that's down from 75% following the Second World War, but we still have a number of young Iraq and Afghanistan leaders who have come back and continue that call to serve. We have Fortune 500 CEOs that are veterans. Again, my boss, Bob McDonald, Fred Smith, the CEO of FedEx, Joe Robles, former CEO of USAA, Steve Reineman, former CEO of PepsiCo. We need to show them more and give young kids in America role models to look up to. I think one thing that troubles me is, you hear so much of the kind of negative talk on veterans. Well, what is that 16-year-old kid who is at the top of his or her class? Is he or she considering doing ROTC at Princeton? I don't know, because there's probably not enough role models out there that are saying, like, gosh, the military is a great thing. Becoming a U.S. Marine was the best decision I ever made. Hands down, best decision I ever made. But I want every 16 really smart, capable, passionate, enthusiastic, service-oriented 17-year-old man or woman in this country and their parents to see the military as what it is, which is one of the highest callings and a wonderful, wonderful option for their son and daughter.
Will, can you tell me about your views of the inadequacy of existing veteran support networks, given your experience in veterans advocacy?
Well, I think, as I mentioned before, I think many veteran support networks focus on being patronizing towards veterans by giving them gifts, things that at the end of the day they don't need, and they're not going to make them feel satisfied, and they're not going to give them purpose. And I think that purpose is one of the defining things that we are giving to these veterans. We say 3 things. You lose 3 things when you take off the military uniform. You lose purpose or a mission. You lose a community or a peer-to-peer support system, and you lose an identity. You know, you were a Marine, now you're no longer a Marine. I know the saying, once a Marine, always a Marine, but you're no longer carrying your rifle and wearing the uniform anymore, and that's impactful. So it's what we do is giving veterans back those three things through this. And I really liked what Minister Gutenberg has said, and he's been very kind to accept our offer of being a director on the global board of Team Rubicon Global, along with General Petraeus, General Parker, Dr. Charles Kalmbach, who's also in the audience. There are geopolitical consequences, I think, of what we're doing here. If you can imagine, 5 years from now, we're going to have 12 Team Rubicons around the world. That's our vision. To have 12 Team Rubicons. These are from countries, the coalition of countries that we fought with in Iraq and Afghanistan. Afghanistan being the largest coalition in the history of warfare, 50 countries. So if we build a Team Rubicon in the UK, in Australia, and Norway, and we build out that 5-year vision, and you can imagine maybe having a Team Rubicon India and a Team Rubicon Pakistan, taking veterans from these two countries who don't like each other, previously warring countries, and deploying them together somewhere in the world in response to a natural disaster. There's a cultural diplomacy angle here. And I think that's very powerful. It's something that excites the board. It's something that's not fully fleshed out, but it's something that definitely excites us.
Thank you, William. Let's watch the TR Purpose video.
We all have a purpose. Sometimes it comes to us without calling. And sometimes we come upon it after a dark, dusty journey, not sure of what we'll find or who we'll be when we come out the other side. And we find we're navigating a road of cause and effect, learning it all connects back to what we've done, what we are doing, and who we are becoming. To find our purpose in the turn of a key, the click of a button, or the swing of a hammer. In a handshake, a hug, a high five. From sore muscles, blistered feet, dust in our nostrils, mud in our ears, or from supporting these soiled souls from afar, making their 4 hours of sleep look a bit more solid and that stiff back a little more ready to tackle the new day. For when that purpose comes knocking, we stand on the line and stare it down, pulling that hard routine into a full-on bear hug embrace. And when it tests us, we wince instead of whine, we grunt instead of groan, we ask for more instead of crying uncle. We all have a purpose. But in the end, how you define your purpose, well, that's up to you.
That was done by our in-house videographer, Kirk Jackson. We didn't hire a firm to do that. That's someone who we met here in Los Angeles, and he was so enamored by our mission. He's not a veteran, that he now runs our digital team, and he's putting together videos like that.
Great. General Parker, yesterday you shared with us that over 18,000 UK service members transition every year. We also started to talk about your views on whether or not transition should begin while the service member is still in service. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. And it's probably the same in the US. There are components of the leaving population. 18,000 in the UK, of which half will not complete their training, as I mentioned before. They need help. They need to have further training in order to integrate more into the society that they're going to have to live with and contribute to. I think we should place them on one side. There will be, and this is a point which is important to make, there are always going to be people that do require help. So what we're not saying is that you don't need the charities that help people that fall on hard times. Just the emphasis should not be on that. The emphasis should be on developing people. In my experience, the UK system is what I would describe as a push model. It takes somebody through their service to the last possible moment so they can get the maximum amount of service out of them, and then starts to train them for a job that has not been identified. It essentially puts them through training courses that will make them a saleable commodity when they go out. And then, if you like, they get placed on the supermarket shelf, and the customer walks past and looks and sees whether they've got the right sort of branding and consistency for them to take them off the shelf and employ them. In my opinion, we should turn that on its head and we should start to train people from the moment that they join the military, so that their development training throughout their service is training conducted by civilian organizations that understand the market that these people are going to be going into in order to make them more employable. So transition is about transitioning your character from a very firm institution that expects you to obey and will look after you in order to make sure that you can do your duty on the front line, to a position where you have to fend for yourself and people are not going to ask unless you push yourself forward. So we need to do social training in transition rather than functional training in transition. And we need to have the confidence that by doing that, you're not going to encourage more people to leave because they feel better trained. You're actually going to encourage them to stay because they'll have the confidence that when the time comes to go, they're going to be employable, so they don't need to worry about leaving now in case they don't get a job.
Minister Gutenberg, do you have an opinion on the timeline of transition training?
I entirely share the view of General Parker here. We are facing the same challenge in Germany. There are now a couple of shy attempts to bridge that gap, but there's still an enormous amount of intellectual work to do in this regard, and finding willingness within the private sector to accept that. Having said that, I was in the private sector before I went into politics, and I'm happily back in the private sector now. Very happily back in the private sector. But for me, in this world, it was always clear I would have the most interest in finding someone who would be exposed to extreme situations and whom I could still somehow hold close to the goals I have, and maybe also to the company goals I have. And to see someone develop internationally, to see someone developing those unique skills, and maybe just having him or her in the company for 2 or 3 weeks per year. But this experience would help others, and those are things you could organize. And the bigger your organization, the bigger your company is, I know how hard it is to serve such things within a company on such waves, but it is a thing that could be organized and where everyone could profit from. So we have conducted a couple of first steps here. We do have a wonderful opportunity for officers that they could actually study on high level, that they go to university, and the standard of our university is pretty high. We would have also for the sergeant ranks offers to be trained during their service, but very often the connection to a future company or the future employer is not given. And I think that's one of the things where we have to work on.
Secretary Sullivan, can you share with us the VA's model of transition or reintegration training?
Yeah, it's so interesting listening to the experience in the UK and in Germany, and I'm sitting here just thinking how universal these challenges of transition are. The U.S. model, for those that are not familiar of it, it's a week-long class called TAP that happens while the service member is still within the Department of Defense. There's actually 3 federal agencies that partner to make TAP happen. It's the Department of Defense, which has 1 day of training, the Department of Labor, which has 3, and then VA, which has the final day. Department of Labor has the main kind of chunk of the training, and that's where they do things like how to write a resume, how to conduct an interview, what types of jobs might you want to apply for. The VA day is mainly focused around benefits, GI Bill, home loan, and other benefits that we offer at ebenefits.gov. Some of the more training on community and resilience training happens in the DoD day. But what we've seen is pretty similar to what the 2 gentlemen just identified from Germany and the UK, and that the mission continues. An organization had a study recently that showed that the number one thing that veterans identified missing from their time in service was camaraderie and community, the number one aspect. So we think we maybe don't do a good enough job telling people that you are leaving one of the most robust communities that you've ever been a part of, and you're transitioning out and kind of to the real world. And that's, again, where organizations like Team Rubicon, like Team Red, White, and Blue can help. The VA's new model under our new secretary is we are starting these community veterans engagement boards at the local level, and we'll have a number of them stood up by the summer. That's part of our My VA initiative. And essentially what that is, and we're hoping the Team Rubicon at the local level will be a part of it, is to have community leaders in really kind of organic networks, many of which already exist throughout the country with the support and advisory capacity of VA, but not run by VA. But community veterans boards where community leaders can all participate together in what is best for the veteran, and then plug veterans into the various organizations, within their own community. So that when veterans are transitioning from, Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton, for example, to Evanston, Illinois, there is a community waiting for them, and there's a warm handoff between that transition point and that veteran's new home.
William, what kind of veteran is attracted to Team Rubicon, and is Team Rubicon providing enough for the reintegration of veterans, in particular those with PTS?
So Team Rubicon, we say we do what we do best, and we partner for the rest. So when it comes to some of the reintegration issues that we're talking about, some of the mental health issues like suicide prevention, anything to deal with PTS, we have outside partner organizations that we refer to, like Give an Hour. And so, but what we do is we have a laser focus on being a best-in-class disaster response organization, and it's the purpose that comes out of that continued service that it has a mental health effect on the veteran. But we're not focused on the other stuff. We do what we do best, we partner for the rest.
And if I can add to that the CVEBs that I just spoke of, that is why it is so vital, because you guys have that partnership with Give an Hour. We need other people to kind of get there, right? You guys are sort of leading the pack on this. And the CVEB model helps that. It makes sure that the Team Rubicon, Team Red, White, and Blue, Mission Continues, SVA leaders in, again, I'll reference Chicago, know the Give an Hour leaders there, such that when those organizations on Team Red, White, and Blue's weekly run at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday identify that they may have a veteran that's struggling, that they're one phone call away from the Give an Hour or from the local VA Vet Center. And those relationships, it's like an Army counterinsurgency strategy. They're local and they're organic. And that's what our My VA initiative will help to facilitate.
Minister Gutenberg, how do you envision Team Rubicon Global assisting in the reintegration of veterans in your country?
I think one extremely important point is to transport, yes, an American idea into other countries where it can grow organically as an independent organization, which then will be connected. And I think that is a wonderful bridging element to what I've said before already, that many countries around the world are struggling at the moment with US military presence, with the appearance of the country, all the other things. And there comes a fantastic idea from over here, which is not working in an imposing matter, but which offers something to others to do something similar, but to give it its own handwriting. And then to find the organization structured, and somehow you have to bring it together at a certain point. But you bring in experiences from all different countries. Again, what I've said before as well, whatever company feels willing to get engaged there would also have suddenly a German face, would have a Pakistani face, may have a Russian face, may have Americans all around the world in a very different way. So we have discussed this quite a bit within Team Rubicon Global, how strong this element can be of independence, of being autarkous in that very respect. And I think it is a huge asset, actually. And it intertwines something which we very often underestimate: different backgrounds, different experiences, different faces. And at the end of the day, it is still the face of a human being approaching other human beings and helping them. And I think that's stronger than anything you could have.
There is that common, if I can add, there is that common bond that we all have, no matter what uniform. We all served in the military on this panel. So we all wore the uniform of our country. And we were all trained actually in similar ways. And so we're repurposing that same training that we've all had.
You trained a bit harder than I did. But it's,
You were a paratrooper before you became the German Minister of Defense. But we are all we were all taking these same skills and repurposing them. It's amazing there is this common bond, and we've had already on mission. We've had veterans from the UK, from Norway, from Australia, from the Philippines deploy alongside American military veterans on the, one of those 84 missions, some of those 84 missions that we've conducted around the world. And it's literally a plug and a play model. It works out so well because they have similar experiences, because they're looking for similar things. They're looking for purpose, they're looking for camaraderie, a peer-to-peer support system. They're looking for a new identity.
Okay, well, thank you so much to our panelists. I'd like to turn this over to the audience for questions. In the back.
Thank you. Is this on? Oh, thank you so much. It's been a great panel. And I think to come to the Team Rubicon point about purpose, a lot of the veteran friends that I have talked about not having a sense of purpose once they're coming out of service and looking for corporate jobs. Is there something we should be looking to tell corporations about how they can try to instill more of a sense of purpose? I mean, that's a larger problem for corporate America, but a sense of purpose to help attract veterans and bring them into the fold a little bit more?
Yeah, I think that's a really critical question, because I think where we've started to move the needle is on the recruiting aspect. But then how do you retain, and how do you have the purpose there? It was something that we looked at when I was at PepsiCo. How do you go from, being a U.S. Marine to selling salty snacks? And that's where the suggestion that I made about the employee resource groups, we've seen people do that really, really well, where that becomes a community within the organization that can then do things like engage in local service projects, go volunteer at the local VA once a month, but it gives folks a network to do that. But that's a critical component that you just identified. Getting veterans in the door is not enough, because we have found that people do miss that sense of purpose. So organizations can and really candidly need to do a lot to instill that within the day-to-day kind of mantra of their company.
And let me add one thing to that. Corporations are increasingly looking to us for corporate volunteerism opportunities for their employees. So when a disaster happens, there are many companies obviously in the area that might want to engage their employees with impactful days of service. Well, we provide that. At the end of the day, you're going to be dirty, you're going to be sweaty. It's an experience of shared misery in some ways, because you're doing it and you're full of purpose, because you can see the fruits of your labor. There's something very strong, impactful about manual labor. What pulls people together.
I would add that diversity and inclusion efforts within corporations should include sensitivity training for civilian counterparts, just to reverse some of the stigma that they might have for incoming military employees, in particular for recruiters and hiring managers.
I talked to a couple of the few German companies that got involved in veteran affairs and who hired veterans and said, we would like to have you taking part in missions like Team Rubicon or others would actually offer them. And then they would ask those veterans when they come back to share their experience with the company and the other employees. And it led to, it may sound simplistic, but it led to a certain amount of shared pride, of shared responsibility. It's something they take home again. And it's broadening this whole kind of responsible approach we need to see there. And this is what I would like to add, is it's a message one could give where both sides actually profit from.
I think that's right.
May I make, maybe, would you forgive a UK perspective? I think we have to be very careful that we, in the UK, don't beat up business too much. There's an awful lot of pressure being applied by some very influential people. Politicians who are desperate to see their policies integrated. So business is getting beaten up to employ more, when they're doing their best, but it's rather as if the socket that is business doesn't fit the plug, which is the system which is pushing our veterans out. And I think one of the ways to bind in things like a sense of service is to allow the private sector to come back down into the transition system far further than it is at the moment. And then you don't have these same friction points that have existed up to now. You smooth them out because people adapt over a longer period.
Jim?
Hi, thanks for the panel. I love the video focusing on purpose, and there was a session earlier today talking about how we have to, completely transition our economy to a low-carbon economy, and the disasters are increasing. We have disaster response from climate change will increase. What about efforts to employ veterans everywhere around the world in transitioning to a low-carbon economy? Certainly here in the United States, I'm a Navy veteran and have tracked, the Defense Quadrennial Review, which shows that climate change is a threat multiplier for national security, and so that would seem to fit right in addition to the disaster response purpose, the greenhouse gas mitigation purpose.
I can't really comment on because we're a service model, not an employment model, and certainly not. I would defer to the former Minister of Economics and Technology.
I think aligning this question with what we have discussed about already, if you have people who have seen the results of climate change related issues and how, let's say, what kind of, it's a different thing having them reporting about their experiences than Fox News or whatever in the evening just showing you the disaster as such. To show you elements of how to tackle that is something that, in my opinion, could translate very much also into strategies you would try to find also as a company in how to communicate properly next steps coming out of that. So it is certainly way more complicated and way more difficult to find a common grounds here. And you see how we are hesitating up here to immediately jump on a connection between climate change, of course disaster relief, that's something that's tightly connected, but from there to go into corporate strategies and other things. But based on experiences, based on the flexibility, based on the, again, leadership skills of how to deal with a disaster you face, instead of just seeing something terrible and being asked for donations, is something that adds a lot to the normal experience you may face there. And Nepal is just such an example. This is not connected to climate change now, but you may have a hurricane, you may have floods, you may have whatever, and there you could actually foster the debate you would like to see probably a bit more intense over here. I tell you very honestly, in Germany, this debate is all over us. We may be a little bit further, but we are not further when it comes to the solutions. And finding solutions here has a lot to do with people who have bring in the experience.
There's the VA as a standalone entity does not have a climate change hiring initiative specifically, but I can tell you the Truman National Security Project in Washington is operation free, and they have done a lot of work toward this end. They've been recognized at the White House. So I think it's an important topic. It needs probably more attention, but there are some folks that are focused on this. Truman's founder, Matt Spence, is actually here at Milken.
One rather tangential comment, because I'm a Brit. You can challenge the common perception of the veteran that he or she is a conservative who tends to go into to do things that are well established. I think our people are exactly the sort of employees that should be getting involved in these challenging areas of change, because that's what we tended to do in our operational lives. So I think you've touched on the identification of a resource which the public perception may be that actually what they go off and do is all those conventional things. Actually, they are hugely unconventional and offer an enormous amount of potential, in my opinion.
Okay, time for 2 more questions. Gentlemen in the back.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's been the last hour or so as veterans in the room, I'm sorry, it's one of those things where your heart really beats and feels great about these organizations like Team Rubicon and these veteran-heavy organizations that really give that resource. But when you take off your green beret and put on your Wall Street hat, if I could, on the corporate side, what's being done for me as an employer to really, when you talk about human capital and deploying that, you have to define your capital stack. So what's being done for me as an employer to kind of define that capital stack and understand what my difference is from your 11 Bravo to maybe your JAG officer that's been a lawyer for 8 years in the military. Because, you know, human capital of veterans is a huge, vast organization. So what's being done on the employing side, I guess, to let me know what I'm getting?
Yeah, so let me just clarify your question. Are you asking what is the government doing to better communicate to corporate America about kind of the asset that they're buying,
Correct,
if I can just put it?
I think that there's any leader in the room that sat down with one of their guys and helped them write the resume. On that side, has been great. But if I don't sit where I sit in my company,
Yeah.
we don't know what we're doing.
Yeah, it's. I appreciate the question. I think the short answer is like probably not enough. That is a large component of what the First Lady and Dr. Biden's Joining Forces initiative is attempting to do, which is get the attention of corporate America and translate to them what they are getting when they hire a veteran in terms of leadership skills, the things that I mentioned earlier, the intangibles that Goldman cannot create on its own. I think the media has done some nice work on it. We've seen some pieces in Fortune and Forbes. There's been some pieces on MSNBC. Time recently, or Time 2 years ago, did the next greatest generation. But there's where I think the government probably can and needs to do more, and the media needs to step up as well, so that there's no doubt in any Fortune 500 leadership that hiring a veteran is a really, really good idea. It's not, you shouldn't do it. We don't want the message to be, you should do it because it's the right thing to do. It's actually, you should do it because it's good for your bottom line. And that goes back to the earlier discussion on stigma of what a veteran is. If we think that a veteran is a hero or a victim, then I'm imagining corporate America kind of thinks they're getting one of these two, right? And if it's not the one on the right here, they may think it's the one on the left. So there's a whole movement around that. And one thing that we've talked about recently is, if you think about from a branding perspective, and this is anecdotal, but if I said to you, what does a Marine Corps captain look like? I would imagine that most people in this room would probably call to mind, my friend Seth Moulton, who's got a square jaw, good-looking guy, 6'2", just was elected to Congress in the Massachusetts 6th. If you said the word veteran, do people think of the same, slaying the dragon type of individual? I'm not sure that they do, and studies have shown us that they don't. So there's a larger movement around changing that so that just becomes obvious and second nature, and I don't think we're there yet.
I agree with you, Secretary Sullivan, and I would add, in my work transitioning special operators, we put the responsibility of the translation on them. We have them take personal and professional assessments, for example, the StrengthsFinder and the EQI, the Emotional Intelligence Inventory, so they can speak articulately and fluently about their capabilities and not rely on that recruiter or the hiring manager to do the translation for them. So to answer the question, I say the responsibility actually falls on the veteran to sell themselves at an interview, not just through the skill set, but also through nonverbal ability, so that they don't come off skittish, frigid, and shell-shocked.
Yeah.
We also need we all, I think, in here recognize, especially the veterans in here, recognize the asset that they will bring to that organization. But we need key leaders in that. We need the Lloyd Blankfeins of the world. Gary Giglio, for instance, is on the board of the Mission Continues. We need people like that to take leadership positions within veteran service organizations, and that will signal to the company the importance of that key leader of that issue.
Well, I think that's one of the rather almost trivial points we have to do. General Parker, David Petraeus, and as having been asked to join that, is to reach out to this community we actually know, that network, which is, of course, a high-level network in certain areas, and to combine that with efforts where we could also become way better. And to combine it with efforts that are not driven by this constant bad conscience approach, by some kind of positive purpose message, and then using new media in a better way, for instance, as well. So there are great approaches now with social media, but this is always expandable. It's so we could do way better in this regard as well. And suddenly you're in an intranet of a company. Suddenly you use another level of transmitting that message where you say, wow, that has been done extremely well. It's this video, when I got it, I sent it around and I got huge repercussions. Because it's professional, it's good, it has a message, and it's positive, and it's not like, oh, we need to help them, and it's they come to help you.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank all of our wonderful panelists, Will McNulty, General Parker, Secretary Sullivan, and Minister Gutenberg, and encourage the audience to continue this conversation around military reintegration. Thank you so much for joining us for this hour.